Take three. Hey, I'm Gary Dawson with the Benchworks podcast. If you like this content, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe below for more content coming down the road. And hang around till the end if you can, because there's some kind of humorous stuff as we go through the material here today. The topic is holding steady. How do we hold our hands steady at the bench without giving up our cup of coffee in the morning? Well, I've got the ideas. I first wrote an article for MJSA that was published in March of 2012, if I remember correctly, called Holding Steady and What a Bench Jeweler Can Learn from a Sniper. So let's start comparing. We're going to first talk about micro or macro bracing versus micro bracing and how you brace your body and your hands can make a huge difference in being able to hold steady. Let's look at a standing rifleman as our first point of comparison here. And you'll just notice that in the standing position, the rifleman, his feet are in contact with the ground, but then he's going to have to control every muscle in his body up until his trigger finger to try and hold this steady, try and hold a steady aim on an object. All right, that's a lot of muscles to control. We'll compare that with the prone position, where we notice that most of the body is in contact with the ground. Feet are spread apart, feet are splayed so that even all parts of the feet are in contact with the ground here. And so there are a lot fewer muscles that need to be controlled in this position. That's an example of macro bracing. This also applies in many real world situations. Imagine you're holding, a bottle in one hand and a bottle in the other hand, and you're holding your arms outstretched like this, and you're trying to pour liquid from one bottle into the other. Well, that's what these images here. All these images were AI created, by the way, so that there's no possibility of copyright infringement. And we're going to make fun of AI towards the end of this because it gets interesting. Okay. So in this case, I should have depicted this hand shaking or something like this, but with at least one arm braced against the table, again, we have fewer muscles to control. So you're going to get a steadier pour. You're not going to miss the lip of this bottle quite so often as you will with your arms all stretched out, right? That's the point of this image. So how does that apply to us as bench jewelers? I'll share a criticism with this picture in just one moment. AI started falling apart here before it gets too bad, but firmly on the seat of the chair, feet not crossed or not hanging out in the air, feet on the ground. Here's my criticism is that actually the back of the person should be pressed against the back of the seat. That would have been a better depiction of macro bracing and real good posture in this situation. But this also, theoretically at least, depicts the guy's wrists or upper forearms braced against his bench pan here or the edge of the table, with the idea that the working muscles that he has to control in this case are just the ones, from the forearm out to the ends of his finger, his or her. So going back to the shooting metaphor that we're going to use here, and talking about micro bracing, a relatively new innovation in the craft of shooting is that the control of micro bracing by means of resting the rifle butt on a small sandbag, which is gripped by the offhand side. So by applying pressure or squeezing the sandbag, tiny increments of elevation control can be maintained. So if you visualize this, rifle's tucked up against the shoulder real well, but your offhand in this case holds a sandbag, which is underneath the rifle butt, and you can apply tension, squeeze it to make a little elevation change. You squeeze it, it's going to push that rifle butt up. Let go, it's going to fall back down a little bit. So you can make micro adjustments in elevation, and that becomes our example of micro bracing in this case. And what I found to be the most effective solution to micro bracing in the laser, for example, or when soldering, is to find some way of bracing my hands together. So now let's look at this image. Notice that my left hand sort of forms a tripod. I've got kind of like this, which is a tripod, I'm calling it, holding the ring and holding the ring very steady in the left hand. And I should point out that if I'm inside the laser now, my forearms are resting against the where you stick your arms into the laser, those holes, you can kind of firmly plant your forearms onto that. And so now notice how these my little finger and ring finger of my right hand are pressed up against my left hand tripod, and then each successive finger in my right hand is also braced into this system. So this is a very solid system. And then my thumb and middle finger and my index finger are kind of holding the laser wire spool, and this makes for a very solid connection. This can be placed very accurately if all this stuff is braced together really well. And I'm not really, the only real muscles I have to control in this case, because I'm holding it steady here, or I control these two fingers basically to move the laser around where I want it to be. So there's a good example of micro bracing. Okay, after you have your bracing things all squared away. The next thing we can talk about in terms of holding steady is the respiratory pause. The natural breathing cycle involves a very brief pause between the exhale and the succeeding inhale. That's just it's a natural part of breathing. And so you can take advantage of that respiratory pause and do your most delicate work during that pause. Now, that doesn't mean holding your breath. In fact, holding your breath can lead, as we'll see a little bit later, to a condition we might call buck fever. You don't want to interrupt that breathing cycle. What you want to do is just take advantage of it, know how it is, and take advantage of it. Okay, now you have that together too. You have macro and micro bracing, and you're taking advantage of your respiratory pause. The next thing we want to take a look at is a concept called visual saccades. So the human eye is set up so that there is an area of very sharp resolution in the back of the eye called the fovea. And that's where your vision is absolutely the sharpest. There's also a dead spot here where the optic nerve attaches to the retina. But right now we're concerned about the fovea. And what we know about that is that visual accuracy, focus, falls off very rapidly. The more distance from the fovea, the less visual acuity you have up in this area. So how does the eye and brain work together to give you what appears to be a very sharp visual range? Everything in between my hands looks pretty sharp. Well, how do we do that since only one small part of my retina is retrieving data of a sharp image? Well, your brain and your eye work together to do something called data sampling. And what that means is visual saccades are actually your eyes darting around your field of vision. I don't remember the number for sure, but it's something in excess of 100 times a second. You'll look here and here and there and there and all around in between, and then using those data samples of visual clarity, your eye puts together a whole range, a field of vision that looks relatively clear inside our brains. This is meant to be kind of a funny depiction of visual saccades as they're happening. Well, with this information, what can we do with it to make our visual or to make our holding steady, to make ourselves more accurate when we're holding steady, either shooting a gun or shooting a laser? Um, the basic it boils down to is aim small, miss small. So we have here, for example, if your aim focus, if you're focused on this entire target, you may end up with a pretty large group, this one over here on the left-hand side. If you're looking though, if you're focusing, if you disregard everything else but focus on the bullseye and maybe even pick just a dust mote or something in the very middle of that bullseye, your accuracy will increase. And actually, this has been proven. It's been proven to work within the game of golf, for example. One example that was studied within the game of golf, specifically during putting, by training golfers to focus on not just the golf ball, but on one specific dimple on the ball. Visual saccades were reduced to less than one angle of degree, and putting accuracy was increased from around 60% to over 85% just by narrowing your field of focus. Uh, and that's not insignificant, from 60 to 85%. Okay, so here's where we start having fun with AI. So I said, can you generate a new image in the same style depicting a golfer putting while focusing on only one dimple? So I get the guy shooting shooting a putter, and the standard target ball, and then the focus dimple here. And here's what I love about this. This is matching away dimple optimized golf balls. Isn't that great? I probably could have given AI a bunch more prompts and getting a better image, but this was too good not to use. And this, folks, is why we don't let AI design jewelry. That, in my book, anyway. It's easier to just design it myself than to have. And I have enough crazy ideas to follow through on. I don't necessarily need AI to give me things. But you can see here how AI, in this case, it's falling apart. So was having fun now, and I said, "Can you make an image in the same style with an eye roll emoji directed at yourself, Gemini?" Because I was using Gemini AI. So I get the same matching weight, dimple optimized balls, same guy shooting a putter, and I get the focus dimple here, but the standard target ball becomes an eye roll emoji with internal feedback to self. So at least AI has a sense of humor. Or maybe that's me anthropomorphizing. I think so. Anyway, that's pretty good stuff. So we got one more thing to talk about here, and I mentioned it before, and that's a buck fever. And it might look like this. If you know a hunter that says, "Oh, I've never gotten buck fever," they're probably lying to you, because that's just not true. Everybody gets it, and I get it in the laser. I often perform. I'm gonna have to read some of this now because there's good stuff here. I often perform repairs on very expensive pieces of jewelry, and for me, buck fever shows up in the back of my jaw, right here, as if I've just bitten into a sour apple. And then it spreads to the back of my neck. And in the worst case, if I can't shake it off and relax in the moment, it can paralyze me almost completely. Then I have to really stop what I'm doing. Uh, Everybody gets it a little bit differently. Some people get dry mouth, some salivate, for some the foot twitches. And even my sniper friend, an incredibly experienced rifleman, recognizes a momentary buildup of muscle tension in a stressful situation as tension in his lower back. When my butt cheeks clench, I know it's time to back off, says my friend. Um, yeah, and I did. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but I consulted in this on this topic with a guy I know who's actually a very good sniper. He's worked in some very tense situations. So this guy's a trainer, actually. He says he trains his students under extreme tension, but not for the purpose of teaching them to perform during those periods, because nobody can really do sensitive work under that kind of stress. The purpose of training with stress is to teach students to recognize it and learn when to back off, reevaluate, and regroup. So what is buck fever? It's a vicious cycle, actually, that begins with the interruption of breath, which causes the heart to beat faster. And remember earlier I said you don't necessarily want to hold your breath to make that great shot, whether it's at the biggest deer you've ever seen or with a laser. What you want to do is take advantage of the respiratory pause, understand your breath cycle, and work with it. Don't try and interrupt it. Because what happens when you do that is the heart actually beats faster because it is working harder then to get the amount of oxygen to muscles. This increased stress This increases stress because of increasing unsteadiness. There's the vicious cycle, which makes breath and heart rate. It all begins to fall apart at that point. And then that's when it begins to create definitive physical sensations, like for me, biting into that sour apple and going around to the back of my neck. I can almost feel the back of my head vibrate. Well, when this happens, the only thing you can do is back off and focus on belly breathing for a minute or two, and get that heart rate back down, get your breathing cycle back to normal, and then begin to take advantage of all the things that we've talked about: macro and micro bracing, respiratory pause, narrow your field of vision to reduce visual saccades, and then calm under tension. Now, here's the last little key. You can't completely relax. Some tension is necessary to hold something very steady. You know, in my case, it could be the little bit of tension in my wrists, going back to that one image of me holding the laser wire. The rest of my body is calm, everything is braced, but I have just a little bit of tension. So it's tension and calm combined. Too much tension will throw you off and blow it, but just the right amount of tension in the right muscles can give you the best, steadiest platform possible for any of the work that you're going to do. Okay. Again, I appreciate your attention. I hope you're enjoying the content I'm creating here. Once again, please give it the big thumbs up if you like the content. Subscribe for more and share this with your friends. It's the motivation of feedback that keeps me going with this. Thanks so much for watching today.